Today I'm going to be talking about part two, my personal approach to giving an astrology reading or consultation, focusing more on astrological tools that indicate themes for the coming year or whatever time period that the client wants to discuss. Sometimes it's 6 months, sometimes it's a month, immediate things are happening, and sometimes it's a year up to even 2 years, depending on major developments. So if we've already looked at the natal chart, which I always look at the natal chart first, because that's very important, we start to get into the different astrological tools to discern, okay, well, what's happening in this client's life. And usually a client will come to me for a reading because there is something important happening, or there's some major event or some major challenge or some major decision to be made. Usually when everything's going great, as I've said before, people don't tend to get readings. They tend to get readings when they want to really understand the why and when and how of how to handle and navigate these time periods. So the most common methods I use are, first and foremost, transits, the secondary progressed moon, the solar return, the annual perfection Lord of the Year, and of course I look at the eclipses and the nodes. And lastly, but not least important, I look at natal planets that are stationing, either retrograde or direct, or natal planets that are progressing into a new sign. Those are all extremely important. So I kind of narrow that all down as I prepare for the consultation. I like to say consultation instead of a reading because it really is a consultation where I am having a conversation. I am not just reading off data to a client. We are having a conversation where they are giving me feedback about their lives and bringing all these themes to life. And I'll often go back 2 years and discuss the major transits and progressions that were active and ask them, well, were you dealing with such and such a type of situation at this time on or in around a particular month in a year? And they will often validate, yes, in fact, that's when an event happened or that's when they made a major decision. So that kind of sets the stage that number one, that their birth time is correct. And number two, it provides confidence in my client that they know, okay, this is going to help me because if she can see what was going on 2 years ago, she's going to understand what's happening now and be able to help me understand this planetary period of my life. So we'll start with transits. Transits are a really popular method of prediction. So basically it's the current planetary positions of the planets in the sky. And using astrology software, we will see a picture of where in the zodiac each planet is currently placed, what degree it's in, and what zodiac sign it's in. And we overlay that chart, the transiting chart, to the natal chart. Now, if the current transits, if any of the planets, especially the Jupiter on out through Pluto, are on one of the major 4 angles, or contacting very closely by degree a natal planet, there are definite themes activated. So this is really helpful. So the sun and the moon and all the planets, they move through the zodiac at different speeds. They all have their own cycles. For example, transiting Uranus takes 84 years to go around a chart, whereas transiting Jupiter takes approximately 12 years, and transiting Saturn takes approximately 29 years. So, and Pluto can spend up to 20 years in transiting a zodiac sign. And of course, Mercury, Venus, and Mars are faster moving. But they're still important, especially if Venus and Mars are going retrograde. And that's a whole nother topic. So transits are extremely useful to see if they are contacting any of our natal planets, angles, points. So for example, right now, Pluto is at like 1 degree of Aquarius, or it's, early degrees of Aquarius, and it's just stationed on October 13th. If somebody has a major angle, one of the major 4 angles, or any planets in early degrees of Aquarius, they are going to be going through an intense time. No doubt. Intense can mean a lot of things, but the common theme is intense, and we would discuss that. And that would be a very helpful discussion for the client. Uranus is also a very important planet, and Uranus is about to station, it's going back into 29 degrees of Taurus, because it recently moved into 0 Gemini for the first time in our lifetime. Yes, 0 Gemini. So any planets in early degrees of air sign Gemini are going to be definitely affected by themes of change, upheaval, individuation, and so forth. Those are all the archetypes of Uranus. So as you can see, the transits alone provide a lot of information if they are interfacing with the client's natal chart. So we look at that first, and then the next thing I look at is the secondary progressions. That is another popular tool, and basically it's calculated by astrology software, and every planet and point within the natal chart is moved forwards by what is known as a day for a year. And this is different for every chart because everyone's natal chart is progressed at a different speed. So I find that secondary progressions are extremely useful for looking at our internal psychological climate, our emotional maturity and development, especially the secondary progressed moon. So, for example, we're all born with moon in a certain zodiac sign at a certain zodiac degree. However, the moon progresses through the chart. It spends 2.5 years in each zodiac sign, circling around the zodiac, circling around our natal chart. For example, right now, my progressed moon is at 24 degrees of Leo. But I was born with my natal moon at 0 degrees of Taurus. So my progressed moon is in my first house of the zodiac chart, the astrological chart. And it's making aspects. Sometimes it's not making aspects, but in my case, it is making aspects. And that gives me an idea of what I'm dealing with emotionally and where my emotional focus is. And that is extremely helpful to know if you're going through changes, new developments, having to make decisions on which direction to go. So that is a very useful tool. I will also look at secondary progressed planets that are making what we call a station. That means it's slowing down to a standstill, and it's either getting ready to go backwards or forwards. Stationing direct is forwards, stationing retrograde is going backwards. That puts a huge red highlighter on that planetary significance and what it means for that client. Major. So that would be noticed. Another method of progression that I'll take a look at is what's called the solar arcs. And really, the solar arcs are great for looking at concrete events in our lives. It basically moves everything at the same speed. For example, The speed that's used is the speed of the sun in a day for a year method for all of the planets and the points. The solar return is another amazing tool. It's one of my favorite tools, actually. It's the birthday chart for the year, providing you have the correct time of birth. And I use whole sign houses now. And there are different ways to look at a natal chart, but the preferred way in traditional astrology is to use the whole sign house system. So the solar return is calculated around the birthday when the birth sun, the exact degree of the sun, the degree, the minute, and the zodiac sign. For example, my sun is at 20 degrees of Libra. So when it comes back around every year, close to my birthday, it doesn't always happen exactly on my birthday, maybe the day before or the day after. When it comes to that degree, there's a chart formed at that moment that is very significant because it suggests themes for the coming year. And what else is looked at along with the solar return besides transits is what we call the annual perfected ruler of the year. And so what are annual perfections? Well, annual perfections is a technique in ancient Hellenistic astrology where we can see a theme or area of focus for our birthday year. There's a key planet, or what we call a time lord, using the whole sign house system. It basically is a way of perfecting or moving forward our rising sign, the first house cusp, on every single birthday. So every year there's a certain house activated at a certain age. For example, I just entered in mid-October my 4th house perfection year. So I have Scorpio on the 4th house cusp in my natal chart. So the traditional ruler of Scorpio is Mars. So Mars is my time lord. Venus was last year, but Mars is my current time lord for this birthday year. So I'm really going to look at, first I'm going to look at what planets are in my natal 4th house, because they're going to be activated. And then I'm going to look at where Mars is in my solar return. It happens to be in Scorpio. It's domicile. That means it feels at home in Scorpio because it rules Scorpio in my 1st house of my birthday chart. So that gives me a very good idea of how I'm using that Mars energy this year. And the aspects it's making to other planets in the birthday chart tell me a lot about how that Mars is going to, basically play out this year. Not exactly black and white, but I get a very good idea about that. So I will also consider, again, the planets in my natal 4th house when they're activated, because it's a 4th house perfection year. I will look at Mars transits throughout the year, any progressions to Mars, any eclipses to Mars. I will look at the nodes, the destiny points, the north node, the south node. What are they doing? All of these factors are synthesized, okay? And eclipses are very important, as I've discussed in previous episodes. They reveal chapters in what I call the novel of our lives. Different chapters, different periods. So full moons and new moons, in particular solar eclipses, really can set things off. Events in motion, that's all looked at when I'm preparing. So I would like to give another example of what I commonly use. I will look at often, not as much as the solar return, that's the primary return I will look at, but depending on a client's interests, we can return all the planets. I can look at the lunar return, which is where our moon returns to its exact degree and minute and zodiac sign each month. So we have a lunar return each month, which gives the emotional climate for that month for each of us individually. Where is the moon? What aspects is it making this month? And you can basically read that as kind of a mini astrology reading for that month. I look at that. In matters of love and relationships, I'll look at the Venus return, which lasts longer than a month. For Mars, how we use our energy, our will, our drive, our initiative, our passion, all of that, I will look at the Mars return, especially if the client is having a Mars return at the time of the reading. Or, for example, last year, I was having a Venus return on my solar return. So that brought up all things Venusian that were very important in my last birthday year. So depending on the client and where they are, the focus gets narrowed or certain techniques are used over other techniques. But, in summary, I use transits, cycles of the planets as they move through the zodiac, the secondary progressed moon, the secondary progressed stations, or what we call ingresses, when the natal planet is progressing into a new sign. The solar return, the annual perfection, Lord of the Year. What is the house that is the annual perfection house of the year, and who is the Lord of that house? In other words, the ruler. What is that doing in the solar return? What is it doing in the natal chart? To give me an idea and expectation of what I might expect. Eclipses. We are now having eclipses in Virgo and Pisces. So I look at where the eclipses are happening in the solar return and in the natal chart. The North Node and South Node. I've mentioned the nodes before. They're not planets. They are points that are symbolic of the South Node being gifts and talents we've come in with in this lifetime. Also, what we're used to, what we're good at, what comes easy for us, what feels comfortable, where we feel at home, what we feel a natural affinity with. The North Node is growth and development. It can feel very challenging when we're having a North Node activation because we're being challenged to grow in that area. We're symbolically not familiar as much with that element or that way of being in the world. And so often a North Node eclipse that's hitting our charts, our natal charts, or a North Node, an outer planet to our North Node is going to bring in significant events. For example, my North Node is in Leo and my South Node is in Aquarius. So when I've had planetary conjunctions, that means together, to my North Node and my South Node, major themes in my life were activated. And some of them were very challenging, and some of them felt right, and they felt like, okay, this is familiar. I've done this before, and so forth. So it's really fascinating. You can learn a lot about yourself, your life themes. And not to leave out, and I mentioned this in my last recording, I do look at transits to the sun-moon midpoint. That is the degree of difference midway between the natal sun and the natal moon. So if there's a planet, especially an outer planet, at the sun-moon midpoint, that is going to give me a very good idea of what that client is dealing with at that time. A theme. An overarching theme. And I might jump right in with that to start the conversation before I even get into the transits. So it really depends. But that gives you a good idea of how I go about interpreting what the year ahead is going to look like. Again, I don't make negative, scary predictions, though I don't shy away from talking about challenging subjects because let's face it, we go through challenging times in this life. And excuse me, someone was at the door. I will, again, to sum up, look at the recent past, segue into the now, and look at the near future, and just weave that all together. So if you found this interesting and you'd like to book a update or a natal birth chart reading with an update, you can find the information to book a reading at www.carolbellis.com. You can find me on Substack, and I accept Venmo and PayPal, and I look forward to hearing from you if you're interested. Bye for now.